Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. If you're in Europe, and this morning, if you're joining us from the United States, Freedom House is pleased to host its third annual Media Policy Forum, which, due to the coronavirus pandemic, is one online session this year. Under these circumstances, we were grateful to be able to combine our event with the Mass Media Forum hosted by the Association of Independent Press, the Press Council, the Independent Journalism Center, and the Association of Electronic Press as part of their larger annual Mass Media Forum. Firstly, I'd like to thank our organizers and then also recognize our key supporters who made this event possible, among them USAID, UK Aid, Internews, the Black Sea Trust of the German Marshall Fund, and the Friedrich Naumann Stiftung. Finally, I would like to thank Freedom House staff in Chisinau, our local representative Tatiana Puyu, our project coordinator Olesia Garbuz, and in DC, our senior program associate April Gordon and Joseph Pastransky, our intern. None of this could have happened without you. So we're really excited to be here today. We have a very interesting discussion lined up for you, focused on the defense of and respect for media freedom under pandemic conditions, and the careful balance between defending freedom of expression while also navigating emergency restrictions under pandemic conditions. Just to briefly introduce our wonderful panel today, I am Gina Lentine, Senior Program Officer for Europe and Eurasia with Freedom House. I cover our democracy and human rights assistance efforts in Eastern Europe, Turkey, and the South Caucasus. I am pleased to introduce as the person who will be giving our keynote remarks, Mr. Scott Hocklander, USAID Mission Director in Moldova, to whom I will give the floor shortly, and then briefly to introduce our expert panelists this morning / afternoon, including Anastasia Nani, the Deputy Director of the Independent Journalism Center in Moldova, Lolita Buka, who serves as a judge's assistant for the Constitutional Court of Latvia. And we have Ms. Katerina Sergatskova, co-founder and editor-in-chief of Zaborona, one of Ukraine's strongest independent online investigative outlets. And finally, Mr. Radu Foltea, the State Secretary of the Ministry of Justice of Moldova. To give you just a couple of reminders about things, we have a forthcoming policy brief, Media Policy in a Pandemic, Lessons from Moldova, Ukraine, and Latvia, which will have in-depth coverage, analysis, and policy recommendations on the topic we will be discussing today. We will publish and share this brief towards the end of this month, so please keep an eye on your email and on Freedom House's website for our upcoming policy analysis. Two quick housekeeping notes before we get started. So we will be facilitating this panel in 3 languages: English, Russian, and Romanian. Simultaneous interpretation will be available in all 3 languages. For those of you who need English interpretation for the non-English segments of our event, please select English under the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. Likewise, you can do the same for Russian and Romanian. If you do not see Romanian indicated as an option on your screen, please select the French language option, which will bring you to Romanian translation. And then for the Q&A session, audience members can write their questions in their preferred language in Russian, English, or Romanian into the chat. We will field your questions from the chat, but please do not use the raise hand function. So with all of that said, at this point, I would like to give the floor to the USAID Mission Director, Scott Hocklander, for his introductory remarks. Thank you, Scott.
Yeah, thanks so much, Gina. Panelists, we got a great set of speakers. Thank you. I'm honored to be here today with you to discuss the current media environment, which is certainly an incredibly important topic in Moldova as it is elsewhere. I would also like to thank the organizers of the Mass Media Forum for creating the space necessary for these discussions, and of course, for the invitation to say a few words today. I'd also like to thank IJC, Internews, Freedom House, and all the investigative journalists who search for and shine the light on abuses of media, democracy, and information every day. Looking out today, we see a world struggling with the pandemic, with so many associated unknowns. I think if you add into it the proliferation of media platforms, sources, et cetera, without the concomitant growth and oversight, it's a precarious time. And I would argue that timely, accurate, understandable information has never been needed more than now. It's well known that USAID believes in the importance of independent media in Moldova and around the world. And I think we've made those investments and continue to make them. USAID contributes to the development of Moldovan media through its Media Enabling Democracy, Inclusion, and Accountability in Moldova project. This 5-year-long activity, funded in partnership with UK Aid, promotes the development of Moldova's independent and professional media. The program aims to expand citizens' access to a variety of perspectives and to foster a media sector that is more resilient to political and financial pressures. This work is a critical part of USAID's strategic vision. USAID views independent media as a needed partner to encourage constructive and informed citizen engagement. Under our new strategy, we aim to promote demand-driven governance and foster a sense of civic identity. Media plays a critical role in informing citizens while also providing the public with more effective means of giving voice to their concerns and priorities. We also support media critical thinking skills as part of our work in the education sector. I think, and I think this speaks to the panel that, support for Moldovan media has become even more critical in the context of COVID-19. The government and local media community are grappling with new challenges to ensure that the public receives timely and objective information necessary to safeguard the health and the prosperity of the Moldovan society. The pandemic is putting additional strain on the operating environment for independent media. A recent study by Freedom House stated that the pandemic has fueled a crisis of democracy around the world, with media freedoms among the hardest hit. Burdens such as major cuts to revenue streams and logistical and safety issues related to remote and distance reporting are leading to decreasing access to information. As I mentioned, we're in challenging times. It is important to acknowledge that even the most well-meaning of governments struggle to address the very real and present threats posed by the health crisis and its accompanying deluge of disinformation. Finding the right balance between ensuring citizens' safety and their fundamental right to access to information is not an easy task. It can only be achieved if the Moldovan government, civil society, and the media community work together in a transparent and participatory process. It's possible. Ambassador Hogan spoke earlier today and outlined several steps Moldova can take, including adding civil society to the Audiovisual Council, switching to digital broadcasting, and reestablishing legislative working groups on media. So it's there, the opportunity is there, and I think with the right people, all the right people in the same room talking respectfully and constructively, change is possible. I'm also very much looking forward to today's expert discussion, or I think a lot of these important topics will come up, which will put Moldova's media regulatory approach under the pandemic in the context of its neighbors, Latvia and Ukraine, and provide a much needed space for knowledge sharing across borders. Just lastly, I'd like to thank again the panelists for their willingness to participate. I encourage active engagement, of course, in a principled way with the Moldovan government at this critical time to ensure that democratic values, including media freedom, are recognized and enforced. I wish you all success in the remainder of the forum, and thank you again for the opportunity to speak here today.
Thank you so much, Scott. You've really kind of kicked off our discussion, I think, in a good direction, particularly given this question that we're grappling with is how can, civil society and governments really shine a light on and find constructive solutions for this challenge of restrictions of human rights, but particularly freedom of expression, freedom of the media under pandemic conditions. So with that, I'm excited to begin our panel discussion. So we'll have about 1 hour for our discussion itself. Between our experts here, we have a lot to say and a lot to cover. So I hope you'll find our discussion enriching and interesting. However, I would like to at the end leave about 15 to 20 minutes for questions from the audience. Again, you're welcome to input your question into the chat in your language of choice and preference. And we'll be, very happy to hear kind of your thoughts and what you have to contribute to this discussion as well. So I'll kind of start by, saying a few words to frame our issue, which is that the COVID-19 pandemic has truly fueled a crisis for democracy worldwide. And according to Freedom House's own Freedom in the World Index, democracy has already been in decline for the last 14 years. However, the pandemic has exacerbated this consecutive decline in freedom precipitously over the last year. Governments have responded by engaging in abuses of power, silencing their critics, and weakening or shuttering important institutions, including independent media, which often leads to undermining the very systems of accountability needed to protect public health during this type of a crisis. This problem is particularly acute based on our analysis in partly free countries like Moldova and Ukraine, and even worse in not free environments such as Turkey or Russia, if we're looking from a regional perspective. Since the coronavirus outbreak began, the condition of democracy and human rights has grown worse in 80 countries covered in Freedom House's special Democracy Under Lockdown report. Among this group of countries where democracy has indeed worsened are Moldova and Ukraine. As a side note, it's important to mention Latvia is not covered in the report, but our colleague Lolita will, of course, exhaustively discuss today how Latvia has navigated this crisis. That being said, one of the biggest challenges has been, for governments in particular, has been balancing the proportionality and transparency of restrictions with the protection of and respect for human rights. Again, being able to really kind of find that balance between civil rights and political liberties, and then also restrictions necessary to protect public health. Freedom of the media is unfortunately one area where governments in Eastern Europe have struggled under pandemic conditions. So, kind of given this premise, and given this challenge that we'll be grappling with, the objectives of our session today are to unpack and identify how legislation and legal measures taken by the Moldovan, Latvian, and Ukrainian governments in response to the pandemic have negatively or positively impacted the environment for independent media, and then to also discuss the ways in which the pandemic has directly or indirectly impacted the work of journalists and of independent media more broadly, and to discuss any solutions for mitigating this negative impact. And then also to kind of figuring out and determining how our friends can help. What is the role of the EU, and then also other countries in the Eastern Partnership region? What are other best practices or lessons learned from this experience? And then finally, too, comparing the challenges that policymakers, civil society, and journalists face in grappling with these shared challenges, and then trying to find kind of a common vision and best practices to move forward, since the pandemic will not be going away anytime soon, unfortunately. Um, So, my first question to our speakers, and we'll actually have a chance to go kind of country by country, since since there's a lot to unpack for each example. So, this question, I'll direct, the same question kind of to all three of you so you can talk about your each individual cases. So, firstly, I'd like to ask you, what are some of the key obstacles that journalists and independent media face in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic? And how has this impacted media freedoms more broadly? I'd like to start with our case study of Moldova, Anastasia, since this is at the centerpiece. And then after that, let's turn to Ukraine and then Latvia after that.
Bună ziua tuturor! Gina, îți mulțumesc pentru moderarea acestui panel și sperăm cel puțin să ne alegem cu niște lecții bine învățate de pe urma acestei perioade. Ce trebuie să spun este că starea de urgență introdusă de autorități pe 17 martie 2020, autoritățile din Republica Moldova mă refer aici, în contextul pandemiei de COVID-19 a însemnat pentru jurnaliști nu doar muncă în condiții speciale de securitate, dar și acces restricționat la informație de interes public și lipsă de transparență, care de fapt era o problemă și până atunci pentru comunitatea media din Republica Moldova. Se știe că de-a lungul timpului autoritățile au încercat să găsească tot felul de paravane pentru a se proteja, în special de presa independentă și incomodă. Dacă să ne referim în mod special la perioada asta din martie până în prezent, am urmărit cu îngrijorare felul în care autoritățile au luat decizii care au venit să limiteze sau să îngrădească accesul la informație în defavoarea nu a jurnaliștilor, ci a cetățenilor, de fapt, pentru că suntem și noi cu toții cetățeni. Făceam acum, ca să mă pregătesc de acest eveniment, făceam o retrospectivă a deciziilor luate de autorități începând cu 17 martie 2020, atunci când spuneam că a fost instituită starea de urgență și înțeleg că acum, peste câteva luni, am un tablou întreg și foarte multe decizii care vizau mass media și veneau să limiteze munca jurnaliștilor au fost luate anume în acea perioadă când de fapt statul ar fi trebuit să aibă alte priorități și să lupte cu pandemia chiar de la bun început. Iată că autoritățile noastre au venit cu multe decizii care au venit să lovească în libertatea presei și în accesul la informațiile de interes public. De parcă marele pericol ar fi venit din partea jurnaliștilor. Și nu pot să amintesc aici câteva decizii foarte importante. Vreau să mă refer în primul rând la acea decizie semnată de președintele Consiliului Audiovizualului, emisă la doar câteva zile de la anunțarea stării de urgență. Mai exact, este vorba despre o decizie care obliga toți jurnaliștii din televiziuni și stațiile de radio să citeze cu fidelitate autoritățile naționale sau cele internaționale atunci când vorbesc despre COVID-19. O astfel de decizie venea după ce mai mulți medici au declarat jurnaliștilor că sunt nevoiți să muncească fără echipament de protecție și fără salarii. Avocatul poporului a anunțat despre intenția unui număr foarte mare a medicilor care intenționau atunci să demisioneze din sistemul medical. Și tot avocatul poporului spunea atunci cât de important este rolul jurnaliștilor și că aceștia au nevoie de acces la informații despre starea reală a lucrurilor. Revenind la acea decizie, cele mai multe îngrijorări, vă spuneam că a prezentat articolul 5, care spunea că pe perioada stării de urgență jurnaliștii trebuie să se informeze din ceea ce oferă doar statul. Din fericire, decizia a fost anulată după ce a reacționat societatea civilă. Și ce trebuie să mai știm despre condițiile în care a lucrat mass media din Moldova pe timp de stare de urgență e că la doar o zi de la declararea stării de urgență, Comisia pentru Situații Excepționale a decis triplarea termenului în care jurnaliștii puteau primi răspunsuri la solicitările oficiale de informații, de la 15 zile la 45. Oricine a lucrat măcar o zi în presă știe că și cele 15 zile reprezintă un termen mult prea lung pentru jurnaliști, dar peste 45 de zile acea informație nu mai e aproape deloc actuală. Astfel de decizii, precum este cea a lui Dragoș Vicol sau cea a Comisiei pentru Situații Excepționale, au fost luate în condițiile în care demnitarii au comunicat unilateral și au acceptat invitațiile la emisiuni selectiv. Astfel, jurnaliștii ne-au sesizat atunci atenția despre faptul că nu au avut posibilitatea să adreseze întrebări autorităților pentru a avea un tablou întreg al situației create la acel moment. Chiar și așa trebuie să recunoaștem că mulți dintre jurnaliști au continuat să-și facă munca onest și am apreciat felul în care au lucrat atunci cu demnitate, de fapt. Revenind la deciziile din martie, redacțiile mai multor publicații periodice au fost anunțate tot atunci că Poșta Moldovei nu va mai livra ziarele. Poșta Moldovei, care este o întreprindere de stat, și a asistat serviciul pe o perioadă nedeterminată. Asta în condițiile, o paranteză aici, în care poștașii continuau să distribuie pensiile și alte prestații sociale. Din fericire, acest serviciu a fost reluat doar după ce a reacționat Asociația Presei Independente împreună cu membrii săi. Aici doar câteva decizii care au fost luate în martie. Ofer cuvântul și aș vrea să văd ce spun și colegii mei din Ucraina despre felul în care s-au desfășurat lucrurile în țara vecină.
Thank you, Anastasia. Yes, and now we'll get a chance to hear from Katerina. Anastasia laid out a lot of challenges. It would be helpful to hear again kind of what the most acute threats are to media freedom under pandemic conditions in Ukraine. Perhaps, of course, access to information was brought up as one theme. Is this also relevant in the Ukrainian context?
Thank you very much for the invitation. And yeah, I'm Katerina Sergatskova from Ukraine, and I'm a co-founder of Zabrona Media. And Zabrona is an independent small media outlet that focuses on vulnerabilities, precarious issues, and freedoms in Ukraine and Eastern Europe. The symbol of our Zabrona team was a meme with a dog with, those crazy eyes who drinks tea while sitting in a room on fire and says, "I'm fine." I think many of you had the same feeling when everything around you is falling apart. And all the established rules begin to change, and this was very frustrating at the first time, and we didn't know how to behave, not only in Zabrona, but all of Ukrainian journalists. I think they feel the same. For example, my colleagues were scared to go on streets and to report anything from the streets. So we prepared most of our materials online, and of course this affected our reporting very much at the first time, because it was really scary to go outside. I want to say that at the beginning of the pandemic, most of journalists in Ukraine did not have an access to high quality masks and some special things to go outside, just as the doctors did not have this access. So many journalists fell ill with COVID-19 in the first month of pandemic. Many of them refused to report from dangerous places because of that. Fortunately, my team was able to get help from some NGOs we managed to order some protective equipment using our status of journalists. So yeah, we were lucky, but it was really tough at the first months of the pandemic, because we many of journalists didn't have, you know, many things to do their reporting. And due to access to information, this is very important. Due to pandemic, many states began to give access to information more than earlier. But in Ukraine, some data began to be closed. So the loudest case is that is very recent. The Constitutional Court of Ukraine declared the law on e-declarations of top officials. They said that this law is unconstitutional, and that it should be repealed. And on the same day, Ukrainian National Agency for the Prevention of Corruption, they closed the access to all of electronic declarations. And it was like a bomb, because it was very, very important law for journalists, for civil activists, because we, it was our handbook, those declarations. And I think it was a conspiracy of judges and members of parliaments and some politicians who were greatly, hampered by this law. According to they had to report to society about about what do they have, and there was a criminal responsibility for false information in those declarations. So they were very happy about this constitutional court decision. The coronavirus has nothing to do with this. In one hand, but many of activists and journalists, as well as I do, were sure that the court would not overturn the law if there were no restrictions due to the coronavirus. So officials probably hope that far fewer people would come out to protest this decision than they could do it if there was no restrictions because of pandemic. So yeah.
Thank you, Katerina, for that overview of the situation where it was already a challenging environment for journalists in Ukraine, and then of course the coronavirus pandemic made things kind of even worse. Lolita, I would love to hear a little bit from you on how Latvia has navigated this crisis, how Latvian journalists have been affected by this or not. Is Latvia a bright spot, kind of, in these among these examples?
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Gina, for the introductions, and thank you to Freedom House and all the other organizers that are making this event possible. I am here as a representative of the Constitutional Court, but as a lawyer, I have to say that this is strictly my opinion, and it is, of course, not binding to the court itself. But I also do some teaching on media law. So media law is kind of close to my heart, personally. In general, I would like to say that Latvia is in a bit better position than Moldova and Ukraine. In general, as regarding the COVID-19 pandemic and as regards the attitudes and the situation of journalists as well. Up until the beginning of October, I would like to say that although we had the emergency situation in the country from early March till early June, our situation regarding the numbers was the numbers of people who actually got sick was much better. We had like 10, 15 cases per day. Now I just checked, today's number is 450 persons that has fallen ill. We're back at the emergency situation that was planned to last till December 6th, but today very freshly news that it's going to be prolonged as well. So for a time, we were this success story in Europe as regarding the fight against COVID-19. Much of it maybe can be attributed to the information that was provided by the government about the whole situation. Some of it most probably can be attributed also to our introverted nature in general. So it's not in our nature really to meet that much, to go. We're not that outgoing, if I can talk and use some stereotypes, of course. But as regarding the journalists, that's why the situation has not been so harsh on journalists in general. At the same time, of course, media, as every other branch of business, has been hit by the pandemic. I think the biggest impact has come in the form of lost revenues from advertisements. We have calculated that Latvian media has lost during this year, in comparison to the last year's revenues, some 10 to 15% of their revenues. At the same time, the researchers and the analysts are still kind of cautious, saying that we will see the impact will last, and we will see next year which media has hit the hardest, because for now the media has had some previous savings that are being used. In addition, we had an election in the capital, so we have the municipality elections, and that kind of helped to boost the advertising market as well. We can see that in the comparison, Lithuania had their governmental elections as well. So their number of lost revenues is somewhere in 10 to 15% as well. At the same time, Estonia, which is our neighbors to the north, they see the loss of revenues in approximately 25%. So the loss of revenues is on a one end is one aspect, but at the same time we see more increase in interest of the media itself. So more people are using internet and TV to get information as they are staying home. And at the same time, there is this loss of revenue. So the media have to fight this bigger, have to find a balance between this bigger interest in their content and this loss of income. Another thing we see is disinformation that affects the media as well. Disinformation in our case comes from different sources, from inside the country as conspiracy theories. I'm sure that every country has some issues with those. But we also have our eastern neighbor that is very, very close, and very many people that obtain information in Russian language are using channels, TV channels, and online portals originating directly from Russia. So we have that as well. As regards the raised concerns in Ukraine and in Moldova about the access to information, I must say that we're kind of lucky enough that there are not, I cannot really speak about any systemic issues. Of course, that there have always been politicians and institutions that want to hide one type of information or try to use this kind of a secret, I don't know, secret meetings to discuss something, but it's nothing really systemic, at least. And it's not really the legislator that tries to hide some information. Of course, now speaking on behalf of the Constitutional Court, we have seen some submissions that are more or less directly or indirectly connected with the COVID-19 situation. As for now, I think only one case has been initiated that deals specifically with COVID-19 limitations, but that is not really connected with access to information, but with gambling sites. So that's not the topic of our today's discussion, and I will not go there. But yes, of course, we are not. I mean, I guess we are better situated now as in comparison to Ukraine and Moldova. But of course, we have our own issues as well.
Thank you, Lolita, for that kind of overview of what Latvia kind of has done successfully to navigate media freedom in the context of the pandemic, but then, also what they've kind of struggled with. I'd like to take a moment and kind of turn to civil society's role and also the role of journalists and the agency that they have kind of in all of this. We've talked about how these government restrictions have specifically affected access to information, how they've perhaps also exacerbated the challenges of disinformation, and then also, the fact that journalists do not have access to enough PPE, personal protective equipment, to be able to do their work safely, and then also to how journalists have had to work without pay, in these challenging times. So my question for you all is, how has civil society and local media responded to new government restrictions during the pandemic? And from your view, which responses have been effective in promoting positive change, and which have not? So let's start with Moldova. Again, kind of our core case study here. Anastasia, what can you tell us about this?
Da, colegi și colege, vă spuneam mai devreme că împreună cu echipa Centrului pentru Jurnalism Independent din Republica Moldova am apreciat felul în care mulți dintre colegii noștri au continuat să-și facă munca în condiții deloc ușoare. Pe de altă parte, urmăream cu îngrijorare felul în care autoritățile au luat decizii unanime care veneau să limiteze și să îngrădească accesul la informație în defavoarea cetățenilor. Astfel, ca să amintesc, că mulți dintre colegii noștri nu au avut posibilitatea să adreseze autorităților întrebări care să ofere claritate asupra problemelor majore ce ne vizează și ne vizau pe toți. Am înțeles atunci, în luna aprilie, că a fost momentul potrivit să le reamintim demnitarilor și funcționarilor că rolul jurnaliștilor e să servească interesul public, să informeze cetățenii prezentând faptele corect și echidistant, din diverse perspective, dar și să tragă semnale de alarmă atunci când informațiile oficiale nu sunt suficiente și nu informează complet. Ne-am zis că este momentul să le cerem autorităților să fie mai deschise și mai transparente, să-i trateze pe toți jurnaliștii de o manieră egală, indiferent de instituția media pe care o reprezintă, fără niciun fel de preferințe. Astfel, pentru a coordona mai bine acțiunile noastre, Centrul pentru Jurnalism Independent a creat o celulă de criză a jurnaliștilor, prin care am semnalat cazurile de îngrădire a accesului la informație, a libertății de exprimare sau a dreptului de a informa. Așa că prima acțiune pe care am lansat-o în cadrul acestei celule a fost adresarea unei solicitări comune expediată de circa 25 de organizații către Ministerul Sănătății, prin care ceream ca instituția să organizeze săptămânal conferințe de presă în regim online cu participarea jurnaliștilor. Ne-a reușit după câteva încercări. Începând din luna mai, până recent, Ministerul a organizat săptămânal conferințe online cu participarea jurnaliștilor. Acum ceva timp însă aceste conferințe au fost sistate, iar noi am depus eforturi în continuare pentru a cere ca aceste conferințe să fie reluate. Deocamdată nu se știe când, pentru că Ministerul invocă volumul mare de lucru. Apropo, lansarea acestor conferințe de presă au coincis cu zilele libertății presei, pe care le-am desfășurat tot online, sub sloganul "Interesul public bate starea de urgență". Am lansat și o petiție prin care, alături de circa 350 de semnatari, am îndemnat atunci consumatorii de media să ni se alăture și am cerut ca accesul la informațiile de interes public să fie asigurat așa cum spune legea. Atenționam în acea petiție că restricționarea accesului la informațiile de interes public este o mare problemă pentru jurnaliștii din Republica Moldova și a fost dintotdeauna, aproape dintotdeauna, în funcție de guvernele care s-au prezentat la conducerea țării. De-a lungul ultimilor ani, accesul la datele deținute de autorități le-a fost îngrădit jurnaliștilor sub diferite pretexte. Datele cu caracter personal, secretul de stat și cel comercial, solicitările de informații erau calificate drept petiții. Jurnaliștii erau obligați să solicite informații prin scrisori în loc prin e-mail în secolul 21. Sau erau refuzate, ni se refuza oferirea informațiilor la telefon. Și o paranteză aici, pe parcursul ultimilor 3 ani, Centrul pentru Jurnalism Independent, alături de alte organizații ale societății civile, a depus eforturi continue pentru a îmbunătăți cadrul legal și pentru a reduce inclusiv și acest termen de 15 zile despre care vă vorbeam la început. În iulie 2018, în Parlament a fost înregistrat un astfel de proiect de lege, care, din păcate, nu a ajuns să fie discutat nici până astăzi. Și ca să nu încălcăm tradiția, cum vă spuneam că e problema accesului la informații în Republica Moldova, am primit răspuns la petiție abia peste 3 luni. Autoritățile au recunoscut că mecanismele pentru asigurarea accesului la informații trebuie perfecționate. Voi cita aici, tot ei spun că planifică să revadă cadrul normativ în vederea fortificării libertății de exprimare și neadmiterea limitării nejustificate a accesului la informații. Rămâne să vedem, inclusiv după acest forum, și să înțelegem accesul la informație și transparența în Republica Moldova. Încotro. Mă întreb retoric și o să întreb și autoritățile. Mulțumesc!
Anastasia, thank you. Thank you so much for that. Again, transparency and access to information is so important for journalists to be able to do their job. But then also, too, again, so that citizens are informed and then can make decisions and formulate their opinions accordingly. Katerina, what have we seen in Ukraine in terms of how civil society and local media have responded to these types of government restrictions? And then, what have you seen as, kind of any sort of effective or successful examples?
Right. Yeah, unfortunately, we have a similar situation to Moldova because sometimes officials, they use this law on access to information to answer as long as they could, and they many of officials ask journalists, to write our answers, our questions, in writing. I mean, in emails or so they don't want to respond, for example, in a telephone interview. So it's a bit, difficult to ask to work in such conditions, because they can answer for 7 days or 2 weeks. It is too long to have actual information on coronavirus, or any information that could be important for the society. Another thing that at first time of the pandemic, our government gave conflicting information about some rules of for the coronavirus pandemic, and some restrictions. For example, the Ministry of Health, they say that masks should only be worn by those who were sick with coronavirus. And this raised a wave of real fear between people on the streets, because many citizens saw that if somebody is wearing a mask, it means that he's infected with a virus. So it caused some panic in the society. But yeah, that ministry released new information that masks should be worn by everybody. It was a bit awkward. Yeah, and in addition to that, some citizens began to publish the numbers of apartments and houses where, in their opinion, live people infected with coronavirus. So yeah, the disease seemed to most of citizens something like HIV, and the Ministry of Health did little to help prevent the spreading of such myths. But it was kind of first 2 or 3 months of the pandemic, and now it's, I think, in this sphere it's totally fine now. Also, we had a very loud case in a village near Poltava, which is called Novi Sanjari. Maybe somebody of you saw this on television, because it was pretty viral. In March this year, Ukrainian president announced that an airplane with citizens who were stuck in Wuhan due to a lockdown, they were flying from China to Ukraine, and he said that these people will be accommodated in a sanatorium in Novi Sanjari, and locals started, a large-scale protest against those people who were who were flying to Ukraine. And they asked to ban on landing the plane, so they would not affect locals with coronavirus. And this was a great panic and there was a lot of disinformation and fake news, so no one could understand what was really going on. And as I said before, many of journalists did not have protection to go there and to report what was going on. So yeah, the panic was created by the wrongly chosen tactics of the office of president. And in addition, I would say about local elections, because we had local elections over Ukraine in this fall. and the elections were affected by coronavirus. I will explain how. The pandemic influenced the way how local authorities articulated some of restrictions related to coronavirus. For example, some mayors who were planning to go at the election again, to win again, they didn't want to to spoil their reputation. Didn't want to upset their voters, and some of them reported inaccurate data on the number of cases in the cities. And there have been cases when local laboratories have issued false coronavirus tests. They claim that your result is negative, so you're not ill with coronavirus, but in fact people were infected. And this was because local administrations didn't want to increase the negative statistics in their cities. So yeah, this was a negative result of the coronavirus and the responsibility of the local authorities. And by the way, some mayors who won these local elections died from the coronavirus. So yeah, it was pretty frustrating.
It's a pretty bleak it's a pretty bleak picture that that you're describing, and it sounds like too that things are still kind of out of control when it comes to the coronavirus pandemic. I'm being kind of mindful of the time because I have some questions as well that I'd like to address to Radu Foltea. But very quickly, Lolita, is there kind of any sort of glimmer of hope in terms of what civil society has done in Latvia to address this issue? Just like in a couple words.
Yes, I guess the civil society reacts where it hurts the most probably in each country. And as I said, for us, it was the lost revenues for the media. So the civil society and together with some independent media and with the commercial media raised concerns pretty early about this trend that the advertisers do not want to post their ads anymore, that they are losing their income in this way. So their activity and their actions and advertisements posted by the media themselves, it actually helped the government to see the issue itself. So some funds were awarded to the media. In together, it was something like 2 million euros, which is maybe doesn't sound that much, but then again, Latvia is not that big of a country. So it kind of helped, and the media has said that these funds have helped them to get over some of the outcomes of this pandemic. However, it is, as I said, it is yet to be seen how big actually the losses are, and of course those funds will not cover it all. Yeah, so I guess that's it for from my side now.
Lolita, thank you. So, again, since we have a discussion panel that's essentially, civil society actors, and then of course, Mr. Foltea will bring in kind of the government perspective, at least as far as the Republic of Moldova is concerned. I'd like to pose a question to him, which is that, of course, many governments worldwide were not prepared to or equipped to handle this pandemic. I could certainly speak myself about the case of the United States, but that would be a whole separate discussion. But That being said, of course, like this is something, this is a big question that many governments, have been struggling with. And the question that I have for you is, what are examples of permissible limitations on media freedom in the context of the pandemic? What is acceptable, again, when as far as public health and safety is concerned, if anything? And then, how do you determine that? And then also too, how can government policies effectively respond to a crisis without kind of overly curtailing freedom of expression?
Well, Gina, thank you very much for it's a titanic question for me to answer. I'm just a humble state secretary at the Ministry of Justice, so yeah. Well, first of all, let me start with the fact that this pandemic has indeed had and still has just a huge impact on all of our lives, and of course, media freedom is also affected by this. As Anastasia has narrated previously, some of the ups and downs of the since March of this year, when we had the state of emergency instituted in our country, in Moldova, and afterwards it's just a continuous process. I would describe it as a continuous process wherein we all learn how to act and how to sort of find an opportunity and a window for a dialogue in order to solve or resolve all these issues, including media freedom. During the state of emergency, it was as in any other country, I believe, not many countries in the world, I believe, would face state of emergencies very frequently or often. So it was a situation that like Moldova didn't face it before in such a major scale. So of course, you approach all the areas with a little bit of caution, so that you try to ensure the proportionality between access to information, media freedom, and of course the information that is being handled, of course. But this shouldn't in any way impede or infringe media to have its freedom and access that information. Of course, information is crucial because all of us, first of all, are citizens of a country. So any of us would have the right to are entitled to the right or entitled to the right to have access to accurate and accessible information about this specific issue, its pandemic, how it evolves, etc., etc. In terms of, I think that during the state of emergency and post state of emergency, we have been in a process of lessons learned, and I believe that from now on we will have a more sort of should have a more proactive approach in dialogue on both sides, that is the government and the media, in terms of to understand better, to understand much better the inquiries for information and how the government agencies can feed or can provide this information to the media, so that the media freedom is assured, and what is the most important, all of us, that is citizens, are offered accurate and trustworthy information about the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you for that. One thing I'd like to, I guess, give give our civil society kind of colleagues, particularly in this case, Anastasia, to respond to, is, I think one example that I'm seeing kind of from all of the country cases, and again, this is kind of a big question too, regardless of the pandemic, is how do governments and civil society deal with disinformation in a way that also respects freedom of expression? And of course, like this is a big question that Moldova, Ukraine, the Baltic countries, Latvia, of course, among them, have been struggling with, since before the pandemic, both the question of, disinformation from Russia, but then also homegrown or domestic disinformation, and what measures can be taken to address this problem that also still respect freedom of expression. And this is, of course, worsened under the pandemic, given the proliferation of conspiracy theories that fly around the internet from social media platforms, from from certain websites. Kind of in this case, like where is kind of the balance for that specific issue, when it comes to kind of government policy, but then when it also comes to the role of civil society in kind of like moderating or mitigating this threat? Maybe I'd suggest, again, kind of being mindful of the time. Maybe Anastasia, if you could say a couple words, then Radu, you could respond, and then Katerina with the Ukrainian example kind of after that, and then Lolita kind of third, if that's okay.
Gina și dragi colegi, ce n-am menționat până acum e că ce a lipsit în Moldova un discurs coerent din partea autorităților despre pandemia de COVID-19 și cum să acționeze cetățenii. Nu vreau să sune prea dur, dar așa se întâmplă că dezinformarea, pe de o parte, venea și din partea unor autorități în Republica Moldova. În timp ce Ministerul Sănătății bătea alarma să stăm acasă, să purtăm măști, să nu ieșim în stradă, guvernul scotea tancuri pe străzi, erau interzise petrecerile. Am asistat la un soi de bâlbâială din partea președintelui în exercițiu, care spunea că coronavirusul poate trece ca o răceală și el se anunța aproape doctor, dar și din partea premierului Ion Chicu, care în luna august a sărbat nunta fiului său într-un local la care, potrivit mai multor surse, a venit foarte multă lume și pe care a prezentat-o drept o simplă cină. Iată, pe oameni asta cumva i-a debusolat și nu știau cum să acționeze în continuare. Pentru că, pe de o parte, suntem anunțați să stăm acasă, iar pe de altă parte, vedem cei mai mari oameni în stat procedează de fapt invers și merg la tot felul de întâlniri oficiale fără să poarte mască. Și așa cum accesul la informație a fost restricționat în perioada asta, acest vid, bineînțeles, a fost umplut de știri false și teorii ale conspirației promovate în special de mai multe surse pro-Rusia. Asta în condițiile în care Organizația Mondială a Sănătății a recunoscut că unul dintre cele mai periculoase aspecte legate de COVID-19 este infodemia, însoțită de știri false și dezinformare. Nu vă pot aduce exemple bune din Republica Moldova, vă pot oferi în schimb un anti-exemplu cum să lupți cu știrile false. Ni l-a oferit Serviciul de Informații și Securitate tot în martie, la 2 zile de la declararea stării de urgență. Atunci, Serviciul de Informații și Securitate a asistat accesul către 52 de site-uri anonime care ar fi distribuit știri false despre pandemia de coronavirus. În acel document semnat de directorul SIS se preciza că măsurile sunt valabile pe durata stării de urgență. Odată cu luarea acelei decizii, recunosc că am avut sentimente contradictorii. Pe de o parte, într-adevăr, acele site-uri furnizau știri false, dar a prezentat mai multe îngrijorări felul în care a acționat Serviciul de Informații și Securitate pentru că nu au acționat de o manieră transparentă. Atunci, organizațiile neguvernamentale de media, aici ca să amintesc din nou despre rolul societății civile în Republica Moldova, au cerut autorităților să nu mai admită astfel de abuzuri împotriva libertății de exprimare și să nu mai aplice restricții disproporționate, motivate de condițiile speciale ale stării de urgență. atragem atunci atenția autorităților că orice măsură întreprinsă trebuie să fie legală și absolut necesară și proporțională cu interesul urmărit. Ca să le venim în ajutor autorităților, Centrul pentru Jurnalism Independent a publicat atunci un ghid despre felul în care trebuie publicată informația într-un mod proactiv, ce informații trebuie să fie pe site-ul fiecarei instituții implicate în gestionarea crizei, astfel încât lumea și oamenii, cetățenii de rând, să fie prevenită panica colectivă și să fie mobilizate eforturile tuturor pentru a combate o astfel de criză.
Let's see, Radu, I don't know if you'd like to respond with just a couple words, and then we'd very much like to hear the example from Ukraine on this big question of disinformation from Katerina.
Yeah, I thank you, Gina. Just to be very brief, indeed, what Anastasia has said and just exemplified are lessons learned for everyone. This is my opinion, that this is the lesson, our lessons learned, like for both government and society. From now on, we don't know if this pandemic will stay for longer. This is the unknown. Hopefully not, but based on these lessons learned, I think we can build actually now a much better, complex and transparent relation and cooperation, so that we continue in a manner that is accepted by everyone, including by all the citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Radu. Turning to you, Katerina.
Thank you. I will be short this time. I would say that Ukrainian parliament launched a special law criminalizing the spreading of false information about the coronavirus. This was pretty big, and it was like kind of after 1 or 2 months after the pandemic that was spread in Ukraine. And soon after they launched this law, the police in Ukraine opened cases for kind of dozens of people. And basically, such people wrote in their social media that the coronavirus is an invention of the special services, something like worldwide conspiracy, that coronavirus is spreading because of 5G. And some people urged not to wear masks, and there also were some messages, like some posts in social media that were spreading panic, also fake information. And there was some discussion about if this law is okay for freedom of speech or not, but this measure, this measure really seemed harsh enough, but there was no violations of the law. So there was no cases in which people were, detained, and it was like fair enough, and as a result the amount of misinformation dropped pretty quickly. So I think this was kind of positive thing, positive restriction. And this didn't violate freedom of speech.
Great, thank you for illustrating that example. For us. It's nice to have a little bit of optimism. And then finally, Lolita, if you could say kind of a couple words about Latvia. And then after this, I'll ask you kind of one closing question. And then I've actually seen several questions come in from audience members, so I want to make sure that we have ample time to address those. We have some good ones.
Yes, so as you said, we really have a lot of experience in disinformation, unfortunately. And the COVID-19 situation has only increased the amount of disinformation. A lot of it, as I said, is coming from inside the country as well. And I also heard from the Ukrainian examples, the keywords of 5G, vaccines. I can add only Bill Gates to this, and Soros, and all the names that were circulating around before, but it's just now increased. The Latvian, kind of ironically, our success at the beginning of the pandemics also have started a new trend of fake news saying that we don't need to wear masks because do you know anybody with the COVID-19? I don't. So that's here as well. However, government is trying to do something about it. There was one member of the parliament who actually posted a post on Twitter saying that he's not going to wear a mask because what is he, a dog? And the government, the parliament took none of it, of course, and they actually expressed like a written reprimand to him. Funnily enough, he was also the same member of the parliamentarian was also a guy who said in March that you must wear a mask. So I guess he just uses that. So the coronavirus is used as a kind of a political argument. On behalf of the government, in addition, we have basically the government is meeting almost every week to discuss whether new restrictions should be introduced or any of them should be lifted. And after all of these meetings, we have press conferences. We have daily updates on the number of, on the statistics, on how the government is dealing with it. So there is ample information coming from the government. At the same time, what the media is saying is that this information does not reach everybody. This information reaches only those who actually think that it's correct. You know, it doesn't really reach those people that contribute to those 5G Bill Gates theories. The civil society is involved in this process as well. There is, we have a couple of organizations that are fact-checking for Facebook, and they have said that they are seeing increase in of course, in disinformation. There is an organization that is called Rebaltica, which is the Center for Independent Journalism. And they have said that they have received actually threats because they have removed some information that, well, somebody liked to see there. But yeah, so I guess the situation, we are fighting it, but I guess let's see how it goes when the vaccine comes out and the new flow of anti-vaccine information comes out. So.
Thank you for that, Lolita. So to kind of close our discussion and then open it up to our audience, if you could kind of sum up just in one or two sentences, and I'm going to leave you with a big question. How can civil society and government work more effectively together, kind of in this challenging time to address the coronavirus pandemic? Of your parting words on this topic.
Probabil deschiderea este cuvântul cheie pentru o colaborare efectivă, astfel încât să avem deschiderea și din partea autorităților, dar și din partea societății civile. Și ea este, vă asigur, în Republica Moldova există această deschidere din partea societății civile și astfel încât să ne așezăm la o masă și să găsim soluții pentru diferite probleme pe care le-am confruntat în perioada asta deloc ușoară.
Thank you. And then Katerina.
I'm absolutely agreed with Anastasia. Yeah, the same in Ukraine. I think government should be open, local authorities should be open and be responsible, and activists and civil society and journalists will be open too. So yeah, it goes, where everybody is responsible.
Lolita, any parting thoughts?
Yeah, I would, of course, openness is very important, and I would add a dialogue as a key word there, because I hope that the situation of the COVID-19 has shown and will help the governments to see that the civil society can be the one that actually points the government, which of course cannot always see everything. That the civil society can actually point the government where there are some issues, and that the government actually listens to the civil society and helps to solve these issues.
Thank you, Lolita. And then finally, closing us out, the perspective of what's your take on this, Mr. Foltea? Again, just in a few words, to close out our discussion today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gina. I think I would definitely agree with my fellow speakers, with Anastasia. I think the need for more more proactive dialogue, openness, and transparency is here. So definitely, on behalf of the Ministry of Justice, within our jurisdiction and within our competences, we are ready to proceed in that dialogue. And even this morning at the session that I attended, I announced, it was a technical announcement, but from my point of view, I think it's a breakthrough that the Ministry of Justice is gradually and hopefully soon will take these competences, will have these competences to be in charge of drafting policy documents and draft amendments and laws in mass media that concerning also access to information and media freedom. I think this is huge for the government, because finally, as far as I know, this is going to be like the time when a ministry or a governmental agency will be specifically in charge of this area. So mass media will not just go to like all the actors or stakeholders that have the power or the right to legislative initiative to try and promote any needed, let's say, either policy documents or draft laws or amendments to existing laws. It will be known that they have a counterpart here, ready to cooperate, discuss all the issues, all what is needed, and jointly promote that. So I see a future. I see a very good future. Thank you.
Thank you. So it looks like we have two good questions waiting for us in the Q&A. So the first one comes from Mr. Valentin Borodaki, looks like, and his question is, it is said that the pandemic will last for 15 years. How do you see the population on the globe, and then also kind of the landscape for journalism or media freedom in 15 years? I hope the pandemic won't last for 15 years, certainly, because it does seem like a vaccine is underway. But this is a very important question. I think Anastasia and Katerina, as our two journalists, I think this is a good question for you. Anastasia, I'll have you kind of say a few words first, and then Katerina, that would be great if you could chime in as well.
15 ani pare un scenariu foarte pesimist. Sperăm totuși ca lucrurile să iei într-o direcție ceva mai optimistă în scurt timp și să găsim o soluție. Dar ce s-a întâmplat în Republica Moldova de la începerea acestei pandemii e că am învățat cu toții să ne adaptăm. S-au adaptat și jurnaliștii, s-au adaptat și organizațiile neguvernamentale, jurnaliștii au învățat sau mai bine zis, managerii de presă au învățat să-și protejeze reporterii atunci când îi trimit pe teren și să știe că securitatea lor este una importantă, pentru că un reporter bun este o valoare pentru o redacție, mai ales în aceste circunstanțe în Republica Moldova. Așa că ne adaptăm, ne-am adaptat, continuăm să învățăm lecții pe care ni le-a oferit această criză.
Thank you. And then, Katerina, what are your thoughts on this question, coming from a journalist's perspective?
In first months of pandemic, we were really frustrated by by everything, restrictions, and environments, and how people react on pandemic issues, and how journalists refusing to report, or there were lots of issues. But now I think we we didn't turn to before pandemic life, but we now have our own rules, I would say, that allowed us to to report as good as we can, during these times of pandemic. And one thing I wanted to add, like a positive impact of the pandemic on journalism in Ukraine, is that after all, many of independent media in Ukraine managed to forge a closer connection with their audience. Some, like us, launched a membership model. We launched a Patreon page, where we can pick some pledges from our audience, and we had success in it, because I think it became even more important for the audience to support independent media that can give truth and crucial important information. So yeah. I think it will be this trend would be it will remain in next year, and with continuation of pandemic.
Thank you, Katerina and Anastasia. So it looks like we have another good question from our colleagues from the Black Sea Trust. And I think that this one is probably for Lolita, and then also for Radu. The question is, have cyber attacks against media institutions increased during the elections or around elections? And have there been any notable steps taken to strengthen or enhance digital resilience? And we touched a little bit on this in our discussion, but I think that question of elections, especially elections happening during pandemic, is an important one.
Yes, that is a very good question, to which, and fortunately, or maybe unfortunately, I don't know, I don't really have a very definite answer. There were no reports about any serious abuses towards any media during the election time. But then again, we have to keep in mind that those elections, they were only municipal elections in the capital, which is, of course, the biggest city in the country, and half of the population lives there. But still, it was one municipality. So I would say that maybe the interest from any outside source of forces was not that big in this case. As regards the resilience, I think media, in that this is the cyber attacks towards media, we haven't seen them in general in that many in the Baltics. Of course, there have been some, specifically regarding hijacked Facebook accounts or something like that. But all in all, I don't think that is the area where media is now concentrating towards something. Our next elections are a bit further away, so let's see how those go, and yeah.
And of course, we have to talk about Moldova, given that you just had major presidential elections. So Radu, definitely would like to hear from you on this front.
Well, thank you, Gina. Sincerely speaking, I didn't monitor, and I don't have any information whether there's been any major cyber attacks, because during that time I was ill. So I was, yeah. But I think, and if I think I read in the news, and Anastasia may help me, that there was a cyber attack on the servers or systems of the National Elections Commission, but I'm not sure. I think I've read that in the news, but I can't say more than that. I haven't monitored, and I didn't notice that. Yeah.
Maybe Anastasia, then, because you look like you have a couple thoughts on this question.
Tentative, bineînțeles, au existat în Republica. Dar, ca să continui firul roșu, nu a fost atât de majore, așa cum spunea și domnul Foltea, dar ca să continui firul roșu, ceea ce spuneam mai devreme, cele mai mari atacuri împotriva presei din Republica Moldova, și mă refer aici la presa independentă și cea incomodă puterii, vin de cele mai multe ori din partea autorităților. Și le-am observat și pe parcursul campaniei electorale, atunci când jurnaliștii au mers în teren și au fost bruscați de către paza de corp a președintelui în exercițiu, și nu doar, au fost tot felul de atacuri pe parcursul inclusiv acestei pandemii din partea atacuri verbale, mai bine zis. Am reacționat în calitate de, sau mai bine zis, organizația pe care o reprezint a reacționat de fiecare dată atunci când a fost cazul, și o să le găsiți pe site-urile noastre, mediaeyes.md în mod special, dar și pe mediacritica.md.
Thank you, Anastasia. This is very, very important to highlight. We have time, I think, for one more question in case someone from the audience has one. But if not, I will, of course, I can ask the last question. If nobody else has one, I will give you kind of just a minute to type in a question if there is one. Let's see. Okay, it looks like you've handed your question to me. But thank you. Those were two really really good and kind of compelling questions. So the last question I'll ask to our panelists is, kind of, at least like from my side, kind of coming as a member of the international community, an international NGO in particular. How can the international community best support you in navigating this Herculean challenge? Of course, in the European Union, and then, which, of course, I've been following somewhat, but then also in the United States, kind of where I'm living every day, we've had, our own challenges in balancing kind of emergency measures, fundamental rights and freedoms, and then, of course, navigating the threat and challenge of disinformation. But, that being said, what can we do to support you, civil society, but then also for Radu, how can we kind of engage also with governments like the Moldovan government to kind of tackle this threat together?
Probabil încerc să răspund tot eu. Voi încerca să o fac pentru că înțeleg că nu mai avem timp și suntem obosiți cu toții, dar probabil ar trebui să vină mesaje din partea comunității internaționale adresate autorităților, astfel încât să le îndreptăm pe calea corectă și să ne ajute astfel să promovăm libertatea de exprimare și garantarea dreptului de acces la informații în Republica Moldova. Și un mediu informațional curat. Deci mesajele, ce încercam să zic, e că e important să simțim acest sprijin, inclusiv moral, din partea comunității internaționale.
Thank you. Any kind of last reactions from the panel to this question? Radu?
Yeah, thank you. Just I would like to continue Anastasia's thought, and besides the messages that would come from the international community, I would add that sort of working with us jointly with the government and Moldovan civil society and the government to sort of embrace and bring in the country, in our country, the best standards of media freedom from throughout the world, recognized Council of Europe globally, and as well as monitoring how those are observed is also important. So I would add that. I would add specifically this as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I see a question just came in. We're out of time, unfortunately, but what we can do is we can answer your question by email and follow up separately, if that works for you, Olga Stavila, because you do ask a really good question. So kind of to close out our session, I want to thank again our wonderful panelists, Anastasia Nani, Lolita Buka, Katerina Sergatskova, and Radu Foltea, and Mr. Scott Hocklander, who has since signed off. And again, I'd like to thank our organizers, our supporters, and thank you for such a rich and kind of interesting and timely discussion. And I know that we will continue to unpack these questions together in the coming months. So thank you again.
Thank you very much, Gina.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
For such a discussion.
Yes, thank you to my colleague panelists, the organizers, and of course the audience as well.
May we leave?
Yes. I think someone has to push the button to make us all leave. I think one of our organizers, maybe April or Alesia.